to set the mood and light a candle. Really creates a nice environment so you can relax. Yes, you relax. Relax. So, beautiful, beautiful candle. Perfect for setting the scene while telling fairy tales, especially tales of the Brothers Grimm, which, as we know, are not quite Disney. I'll pop this just on the side. Now, let us begin. The tale that I'd like to read you is called The Wishing Table, the Gold Ass, and the Cudgel in the Sack. It's on page 97. Here we are. Here we are. Here we are. The Wishing Table, the Gold Ass, and the Cudgel in the Sack. There was once upon a time a tailor who had 3 sons and only 1 goat. But as the goat supported the whole of them with her milk, she was obliged to have good food and be taken to pasture every day. The sons therefore did this in turn. Once the eldest son took her to the churchyard where her finest herbs were to be found, and let her eat and run about there. At night, when it was time to go home, he asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch." "Come home then," said the youth, and took hold of the cord around her neck and led her to the stable and tied her up securely. "Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had as much food as she ought?" "Oh," answered the son, "she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." But the father wished to satisfy himself, and so he went down into the stable, stroked the dear animal, and asked, "Goat, art thou satisfied?" The goat answered, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no food, so went without." "What do I hear?" cried the tailor, and ran upstairs to the youth. "Holloa, thou liar! Thou saidst the goat had had enough, and had lessed her hunger." And in his anger he took the yard measure from the wall and drove him out with blows. The next day was the turn of the second son, who looked out for a place in the fence of the oft garden, where nothing but good herbs grew. And the goat cleared them all off. At night, when he wanted to go home, he asked, "Goat, art thou satisfied?" The goat answered, "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more shall I touch." "Come home then," said the youth, and led her home and tied her up in the stable. "Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had as much food as she ought?" "Oh," answered the son, "she has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." The tailor would not rely on this, so he went down to the stable and said, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The goat answered, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and no food, so went without." "The godless wretch!" cried the tailor, "to let such a good animal hunger." And he ran up and drove the youth out of the doors with the yard measure. Now came the turn of the third son, who wanted to do the thing well, and sought out some bushes with the finest leaves, and let the goat devour them. In the evening, when he wanted to go home, he asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch." "Come home then," said the youth, and led her to the stable and tied her up. "Well," said the old tailor, "has the goat had the proper amount of food? She has eaten so much, not a leaf more she'll touch." The tailor did not trust that, and went down and asked, "Goat, hast thou had enough?" The wicked beast answered, "Wherewithal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without." "Oh, the brood of liars!" cried the tailor, "each as wicked and forgetful of his duty as the other. Ye shall no longer make a fool of me." Quite beside himself with anger, he ran upstairs and belaboured the poor young fellow so vigorously with the yard measure that he sprang out of the house. The old tailor was now alone with his goat. The next morning he went down to the stable, caressed the goat, and said, "Come, my dear little animal, I will take thee to feed thee myself." He took her by the rope and conducted her to the green hedges amongst the milfoil and whatever else goats like to eat. "There, thou mayest for once eat to thy heart's content," he said to her, and he left her browse till evening. Then he asked, "Goat, art thou satisfied?" "I have eaten so much, not a leaf more I'll touch." She said, "Come home then," the tailor said, and led her to the stable where he tied her fast. When he was going away, he turned round and said, "Well, art thou satisfied for once?" But the goat did not behave better to him, and she cried, "Withal should I be satisfied? Among the graves I leapt about, and found no leaves, so went without." When the tailor heard this, he was shocked. He saw clearly that he drove his sons out for no good cause. "Wait, thou ungrateful creature," cried he, "it is not enough to drive thee forth. I will mark thee so that thou wilt not dare show himself among other tailors." In great haste he ran upstairs and fetched his razor, lathered the goat's head, and shaved her as clean as the palm of his hand. Then, as the yard measure would have been too good for her. He brought the horsewhip and gave her such cuts with it that she ran away in violent haste. When the tailor was left quite alone in his house, he fell into great grief. He would have gladly had his sons back, but no one knew where they were gone. The eldest had apprenticed himself to a joiner, and learned industriously and indefatigably, and when time came for him to go travelling, the master presented him with a little table which had no particular appearance and was made of common wood, but it had one good property. If anyone set it out and said, "Little table, spread thyself," the good little table was at once covered with a clean cloth, and a plate was there, and a knife and a fork beside it, and dishes with boiled meats and roasted meats, as many as there was room for, and a great glass of red wine shone that it made the heart glad. The young journeyman thought, "With this thou hast enough for thy whole life," and went joyously about the world, and never troubled himself at all whether an inn was good or bad, or if anything was to be found in it or not. When it suited him, he did not enter an inn at all, but either on the plain, in a wood, or a meadow, wherever he fancied. He took his little table off his back, set it down before him, and said, "Cover thyself," and then everything appeared to his heart's desire. At length he took it to his head to go back to his father, whose anger would now be appeased, and who would now willingly receive him with this wishing table. It came to pass that on his way home he came one evening to an inn which was filled with guests. They bade him welcome and invited him to sit and eat with them, for otherwise he would have difficulty getting anything. "No," answered the joiner, "I will not take a few bites out of your mouths, rather that than you shall be my guests." They laughed and thought he was jesting with them. However, he placed his wooden table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." Instantly it was covered with food so good that the host could never have procured it, and the smell of it ascended pleasantly to the nostrils of the guests. "Fault, dear friends," said the joiner, and the guests, when they saw that he meant it, did not need to be asked twice, but drew near, pulled out their knives, and attacked it valiantly. And what surprised them the most was that when a dish became empty, a full one instantly took its place of its own accord. The innkeeper stood in one corner and watched the affair. He did not know at all what to say, but thought, "Thou couldst easily find a use for a cook like that in my kitchen." The joiner and his comrades made merry until late into the night. At length they laid down to sleep, and the young apprentice also went to bed and set his magic table against the wall. The host thought, however, let him have no rest, and it occurred to him that there was a little old table in the lumber room which looked just like the apprentice's, and he brought it out quite softly and exchanged it for the wishing table. The next morning the joiner paid for his bed, took up his table, never thinking that he had a false one, and went on his way. At midday he reached his father, who received him with great joy. "Well, my dear son, what hast thou learned?" He said to him, "Father, I have become a joiner." "A good trade," replied the old man. "But what hast thou brought back with thee from thy apprenticeship?" "Father, the best thing which I have brought back with me is this little table." The tailor inspected it on all. "A good trade," replied the old man. "But what hast thou brought back with thee from thy apprenticeship?" "Father, the best thing I have brought back with me is this little table." The tailor inspected it on all sides and said, Thou didst not make a masterpiece when thou madest that table, but it is a table which furnishes itself," replied the son. "When I set it out and tell it to cover itself, the most beautiful dishes stand on it, and wine also, which gladdens the heart. Just invite all of our relations and friends. They shall refresh and enjoy themselves for once, for the table will give them all they require." When the company was assembled, he put his table in the middle of the room and said, "Little table, cover thyself." But the little table did not bestir itself, and remained just as bare as any other table which did not understand language. Then the poor apprentice became aware ashamed to have stood there like a liar. The relations, however, mocked him and were forced to go home without having eaten or drunk. The father had brought out his patches again and went on tailoring, but the son went to a master in the craft. The second son had gone to a miller and apprenticed himself to him. When his years were over, the master said, "As thou hast conducted thyself so well, I give thee a special, peculiar present. It is an ass which neither draws carts or carries sacks." "To what use is he put, then?" asked the young apprentice. "He lets gold drop from his mouth," answered the miller. "If thou settest him on a cloth and say, 'Bricklebrit,' the good animal will drop gold pieces for thee." "That is a fine thing," said the apprentice, thanked the master, and went out into the world. When he had need of gold, he only had to say "Bricklebrit" to his ass, and it rained gold pieces, and he had nothing to do but pick them off the ground. Wheresoever he went, the best of everything was good enough for him, and the dearer the better, because he always had plenty of money and a full purse. When he looked about the world for some time, he thought, "Thou must seek out thy father. If thou goest to him with a gold ass, he will forget his anger and receive thee well. Thou must seek out thy father. If thou goest to him with the gold ass, he will forget his anger and receive me well." It came to pass that he came to the same public house in which his brother's table had come to be exchanged. He led by his ass by the bridle, and the host was about to take the animal from him to tie him up, but the young apprentice said, "Don't trouble yourself, I will take my grey horse into the stable and tie him up myself too, for I must know where he stands." This struck the host as odd, as he thought, for a man who looked forced to look after the ass himself, he could not have much to spend. But when the stranger put his hand in his pocket and brought out 2 gold pieces and said, "Provide something good for him," the host opened his eyes wide and ran and sought, providing the best he could muster. After dinner, the guest asked what he owed. The host did not see why the price should not be doubled, and the apprentice needed 2 more gold pieces. He felt in his pocket, but the gold was just at an end. "Wait an instant, sir," he said. "I will go and fetch some more money." But he took the tablecloth with him. The host could not imagine what this would mean, and being curious, stole after him. As the guest bolted the stable door, he peeped through a hole left by a knot in the wood. The stranger spread out the cloth under the animal and cried, "Bricklebrit," and immediately the beast began to let go gold pieces. So it fairly rained down money on the ground. "Eh, my word," said the host, "ducats are quickly coined there. A purse like that is not amiss." The guest paid his score and went to bed, but in the night the host stole down into the stable, led away the master of the mint, and tied up another ass in his place. Early next morning the apprentice travelled away with his ass, and thought he had had his gold ass. At midday he reached his father, who rejoiced to see him again, and gladly took him in. "What hast thou made of thyself, my son?" asked the old man. "A miller, dear father," he answered. "What hast thou brought back from thy travels?" "Nothing else but an ass." "There are asses enough here," said the father. "I would rather have had a good goat." "Yes," replied the son, "but it's no common ass, but a gold ass." When I say "Bricklebrit," the good beast opens its mouth and drops a whole sheet full of gold pieces onto the floor. "Just summon all our relations hither, and I will make them rich folks." "That suits me well," said the tailor, "for then I shall have no need to torment myself any longer with the needle," and ran out himself and called the relations together. As soon as they were assembled, the miller bade them make way, spread out his cloth, and brought the ass onto the room. "Now watch," he said. And he cried, "Bricklebrit," but no gold pieces fell, and it was clear face and saw that he was betrayed, and begged pardon of the relatives who went home as poor as they came. There was no help for it. The old man had to betake him to his needle once more, and the youth hired himself to a miller. It's really raining outside. I'm not sure if you can hear it or not. It's really raining hard. The third brother had apprenticed himself to a turner, and that is a skilled labour. He was the longest in learning. His brothers, however, told him in a letter how badly things had gone with them and how the innkeeper had cheated them of their beautiful wishing gifts. On the last evening before they reached home, when the turner had served his time and had to set out on his travels, as he conducted himself so well, his master presented him with a sack and said, "There's a cudgel in it." "I can put on the sack," said he, "and it may be of good service to me, but why should there be a cudgel in it? It only makes it heavy." "I'll tell thee why," replied the master. "If anyone has done anything to injure thee, do but just say, 'Out of the sack, cudgel,' and the cudgel will leap forth among the people and play such a dance on their backs that they will not be able to stir or move for a week, and it will not leave off until thou sayest, 'Into the sack, cudgel.'" The apprentice thanked him and put the sack on his back. When anyone came too near to him and wished him to attack, he said, "Out of the sack, cudgel," and instantly the cudgel sprang out and dusted the coat or jacket of one of the other on their backs, and never stopped until it had stripped them off. And it was done so quickly that before anyone was aware, it was already his own turn. In the evening, the young turner reached the inn where his brothers had been cheated. He laid his sack on the table before him and began to talk of all the wonderful things which he'd seen in the world. "Yes," he said, "people may easily find a table that will cover itself. A gold ass. Things of that kind. Extremely good things, which by no means despise. But these are nothing in comparison with the treasure which I have won for myself, and I am carrying about me in my sack there." The innkeeper pricked up his ears. What in the world could that be? Thought he. The sack must be filled with nothing but jewels. I ought to get them cheap too, for all good things go in threes. When it was time for sleep, the guest stretched himself out on the bench and laid his sack beneath him for a pillow. When the innkeeper thought his guest was lying soundly asleep, he went and pushed him and pulled him very gently and carefully to see if the sack would dislodge and that he could possibly draw it away and lay another in its place. The turner, however, had been waiting a long time for this, and now just as the innkeeper was about to give a hearty tug, he cried, "Out of the sack, cudgel." Instantly the little cudgel came forth and fell on the innkeeper and gave him a sound thrashing. The host cried for mercy, but the louder he cried, so much more heavily the cudgel beat the time on his back, until at length he fell to the ground exhausted. Then the turner said, "If thou dost not give back the table which covers thyself and the gold ass, the dance shall begin afresh." "Oh no," cried the host quite humbly, "I'll gladly produce everything, just make the cursed kobold creep back into the sack." Then said the apprentice, "I will let mercy take the place of justice, but be aware of getting into mischief again." "So," he cried, "into the sack, cudgel," and let him have his rest. The next morning the turner went home to his father with the wishing table, the gold ass, and his cudgel in the sack. The tailor rejoiced when he saw him once more, and asked him likewise what he had learned in foreign parts. "Dear father," he said, "I have become a turner." "A skilled trade," said the father. "What hast thou brought back with thee from thy travels?" "A precious thing, dear father," replied the son, "a cudgel in a sack." "What?" cried the father, "a cudgel? That's worth thy trouble indeed. From every tree thou can cut thyself one, but not one like this, dear father. If I say 'out of the sack, cudgel,' the cudgel springs out and leads by anyone who means me ill on a weary dance, and never stops until he lies on the ground and prays for fair weather. Look, with this cudgel I have brought back the wishing table and the gold ass which the thieving innkeeper took away from my brothers. Now let them both be sent for, and we shall, along with all our entire see by thy face that thou would have been interested in being there. Then the turner brought the little table and said, "Now, dear brother, speak to it." And scarcely had the carpenter said table cover light itself, then it was spread and amply covered with the most exquisite dishes. Then such a meal took place as the good tailor had never known in his house, and the whole party of kingsmen stayed together until far into the night, and all were merry and glad. The tailor locked away the needle and thread, the yard measure and goose, in a press, and lived with 3 sons in joy and splendour. What, however, has become of the goat, who was to blame for the tailor driving out his 3 sons? Well, I will tell thee. She was ashamed that she had a bald head, and so she ran into a fox's hole and hid. When the fox came home, he was met by 2 great eyes shining out of the darkness, and was terrified and ran away. A bear met him, and the fox looked quite disturbed, and he said, "What is the matter with thee, brother fox? Why dost thou look like that?" "Ah," answered Redskin, "a fierce beast is in my cave, and I cannot get it out, and it keeps staring at me with its fiery eyes." "We'll soon drive him out," said the bear, and went with him to the cave and looked in. But when he saw the fiery eyes, fear seized him. Likewise, he would have nothing to do with the furious beast, and turned and took to his heels. The bee met him, and as she saw he was ill at ease, she said to him, "Bear, thou art pulling a really pitiful face. What has become of all thy gaiety?" "It is all very well for thee to talk like that," replied the bear. "A furious beast with staring eyes is in Redskin's house, and we can't get it out." The bee said, "Bear, I pity thee. I am a poor, weak creature, whom thou wouldst not turn aside to look at. But still, I believe I can help thee." She flew into the fox's cave, lighted on the goat's smoothly shorn head, and stung her so violently that she sprang up crying, "Meh, meh," and ran forth into the world as if mad.